Okay, in this, our 5th video working on digital painting, I'm going to open up my Photoshop project, but I'm no longer only going to rely on the image that's in my canvas. I am also going to open up my reference photo in Photoshop, so open with Photoshop. And we did this a little bit with digital coloring and stealing colors. But what I'm going to do now, I have both files. They're in the little browser tab at the top. And I'm going to select my first one and then go to Window, Arrange, and I want to do 2 up vertical so that they're side by side. And then I can use the border slider, and then I can use Command minus, shrink it down a little bit. And now that will stay locked there, even while I zoom in here and I'm working. I can also still steal colors from it very easily, but it makes a big difference instead of always having to look at it here as I get closer and closer. Okay, I'm still on this refined painting layer, so let's go over the different basic digital painting layers I'm using. First and foremost, there is a blank white locked layer at the bottom. Then I put a gray layer on top of that. I had my basic shapes, but those soon got overtaken by the underpainting of flat, 100% opaque, kind of filled in color. Even the white is filled in. Then I can get rid of my sketch. It's no longer needed. Then I start playing with different brushes. This is one of the brushes that's in Photoshop. It's an airbrush, and it's fine. It looks very fluffy, but it can look a little computer generated. So instead, we made our own brush, and we built on top of that. Where is my refined painting? There it is. And with that refined brush, I get to give it a little bit more character. And what I like about doing the refined painting on top of my flat color painting is that once I kind of fill it in more, I can play with things like opacity, right, to help blend it. And I can also adjust colors and everything separately from the background colors. Now, if I wanted to merge this brush in with my refined painting layer, I simply select them both holding Command, and then Command E will merge them together. So now they're in the same layer. Notice when I'm painting, I'm pretty disciplined because you can waste a lot of time accidentally painting on the wrong layer. So I lock every layer that I'm not painting on. So I'm still working on the refined painting custom brush layer. Let's go to my brush tool. It's remembering my custom brush. I have a second custom brush I made that's more open. So I'm going to play with that now. And let me adjust those brush settings, because just as they are, even the most interesting and uniquely designed brush will be very ordinary and digital looking. So I want to start with shape dynamics, and I want to control it based on pin pressure because I'm using a tablet. So this will change its size, its scale with pressure sensitivity. But at the same time, I want it not to always match exactly. I want it to jitter. So have a little bit of random, like slight change. And I want the minimum diameter to be a little bit larger. And then this is maybe the most important thing for me in brush settings to making it look believable. I want the angle to change. And I can only do that with a jitter because I don't have a pen stylus that supports tilt, right? But if I did, then I would set it to tilt with my stylus. And then the roundness, that can be interesting. We haven't played with that much. It will round out sharp edges. I'm going to try that pretty strongly here. And you see now the tilt's really going to matter. Okay, now I switch to a smaller size, and I'm at an opacity of about 70, but it's still pressure sensitive for size, so let's see what this brush is like now. Oh yeah. Oh, that's a nice. Now the difference between this and the first custom brush I made is it has a lot more open space in it, so it only gets to full opacity when I overlap it a whole lot. Right? And so that's going to give me a lot of control. I'm still going to just steal colors from myself for the time being. And the difference is, instead of relying on the reference photo so much, I can just look over here. And if I'm looking at the back end, for instance, I can just go over here and zoom in and kind of frame it so I see the back end pretty clearly. You can always use spacebar to get the hand tool when you're zoomed in and move it around. So I'll keep at this about this zoom. And if you haven't already, you definitely want to paint in a darkest dark somewhere and the lightest highlight so you know what value range to work between. And then you hold down Option to steal your color. And now, because I'm using a slightly smaller brush and only about a 70% opacity, I'm going to start moving my hand in the direction of the body, so that each brushstroke, kind of like a Van Gogh painting, helps to define the form. So I'm moving across the back. I'm not doing straight lines. I'm not doing circles for no reason. Trying to follow the form a little bit. And sometimes you'll need to darken the underpainting. Augment it with shadow. Sometimes you'll need to brighten it up, pull out some highlight. But don't be afraid of color. Just keep selecting colors that are created from the overlaps you're creating with this lower opacity brush. And then we'll have some fun with color in a little bit. But right now I'm just trying to get the value right. So I squint a lot. Helps the colors be a little less distracting. And right now I'm just trying to get the form to come across. And to get texture like this fur, I always need to have something lighter underneath and then paint darker on top. But like sponge painting, I can just kind of tap and get it to break up in little ways. I have some of those unusual colors in there, those blues and these pinks. I don't want to be afraid of them. I want to use them because this reference is a little too warm in general for my taste. Because we're replacing every pixel, you might as well choose the colors you like best. Choose the lighting you like best. Now what can happen with all that averaging is it can get towards kind of middle gray. And so every once in a while you go back to your darkest dark and you want to establish that. Throw some of those really dark shadows in. And same thing with highlights, but I don't really have a lot of strong highlights here. Now notice I'm not using the smudge tool. I'm not using the blur tool. Some painters really love those tools. But my thinking is that you can soften and control and blend out form shadows and lighting just by stealing color and having a slightly open-edged brush that overlaps. And then later, if you really need to smooth it out, though I'm not going to need to because my animal is furry, then you're going to use the smudge tool and maybe a little bit of the blur in certain areas. But it's very easy to soften hard edges. It's very difficult to bring a hard edge back over something that's been over softened. So I guess the point of starting this demo the way I did with customizing the new brush is that even if you're like me and you mostly like to use one tool consistently, you need to make sure that the tool does everything you want it to do. And my first brush was just a little too opaque all the way through, at least for finishing off. Some digital painters will just skip between brushes all the time, and that's not hard to do once you're used to it. You can even use your mouse and right-click right wherever you are and pull up your brush options. And you can have them all with different settings ready to go. Good morning. All right, so that worked out pretty quickly. Let's see what a big difference that makes, right? And just with this new brush, since I started today, remember we saved 500 brush settings. I've already filled them all in. But I can go to where I started today, and there's a big difference there to there, right? Notice how my brush strokes are now defining the form. I'm kind of wrapping around them. Even if I end up smoothing everything and polishing it at the end, this is a good way to go. It's like when you carve wood, you move the chisel with the form you're trying to create. And then even if you sand it all out later, it's going to give you a better overall impression of the three-dimensional form. All right, I can hold down spacebar and move it to get to the bottom here. I can do that with my reference as well, which I now can zoom in more easily. And that helps me build up a little faster too. And then just lots of layers of paint to get the effects you want. Typically, some of my students will find kind of a magic brush that maybe it's one they created, or maybe it's one that's in Photoshop's defaults, that they think just makes the perfect texture for their animal or their portrait. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you feel like you're in control of it. But everything I'm showing you is to try to give you control over the tools. It's not unusual for spray painters, people who paint graffiti or use aerosol cans for their work. They don't just take the aerosol can as it is, as they purchased it. They always they take a little pen knife and they customize the tips. They keep a collection of the different spray tips for different textures, different angles. All artists customize their tools, so digital is no different. Your art's going to be better if you know how to make the tool do exactly what you want. Now here's the other thing about digital painting. It's attractive to a lot of people because you can erase completely. You can paint over it without having to wait for the paint to dry. You can completely change it. But there is a downside to that as well, and that's that you don't really adapt and commit. So I try to treat it like, yes, I can always paint over, but by working at lower opacities, I'm always building on what's underneath. So there's always a little bit of that history of the different decisions, the different strokes, the different colors. Because the problem with having unlimited do-overs is you can just take a really long time being indecisive. But the good news is that's a good way to learn.